This week we're going to get into another assignment about shooting now tight with your tightest lens or your telephoto lens, your most telephoto lens. So if you have a kit lens that goes from say 18 to 55 or third 24 to 70 is the higher number that I want you to be shooting with. If you're shooting with an iPhone 11 Pro, like one of you is, shoot with your telephoto lens on that, okay? Again, this is kind of to train your eye to see editorially what might be happening when we start compressing things together. That's what telephoto lenses do, is they take your background and your foreground and they start squeezing them together, and gives you kind of a surrealistic look at the scene, at what's going on that way. And like a wide angle lens, that kind of goes through and distorts things. I like to shoot like an 85 millimeter almost all the time, or maybe just a standard lens at 50, not quite telephoto. 85 millimeter though goes through and just gives me a little bit of compression. Just kind of enhances the beauty of landscapes and that kind of thing when what it is I'm shooting. So that's the assignment. The assignment, shoot tight. I'm going to have this come up on your screen. I'm recording this simultaneously so I can edit this in. I'll have this come up on your screen. And there we go. And so again, kind of the same thing. I'm going to ask you, what does that do to your point of view? You talked about what wide angle lens does to your point of view and to telling the story. This is going to go through and ask you the same thing. There are 3 items on this rubric that you compose a series using a telephoto focal length, that your take is perfect, and that you talk about the influence of the focal length as far as perception is concerned on that one, okay? Also in the modules then for this week, it's a pretty light week actually. I have shoot tight, context illustrated. We talked about context last week, and this goes through and gives you an illustration of what it was that I'm talking about in terms of photojournalism. And then the last one on there, understanding the press conference, gets into a clip of the do's and don'ts on press conferences. Now, this is an old video. It gets into current events from a couple of years ago, and obviously things have changed considerably since then, and maybe not so much for the better. So, but nonetheless, there's still some tips and tricks in how you can make a press conference, covering a press conference, a little bit more interesting within that. So you might want to watch that, because some of the content might end up on a test or two in your not so distant future. All right. One thing I did want to go over though, in terms of shooting for highlights and shadows, one of you submitted an image that was a good image on your wide assignment of a landscape, and it was a little underexposed, which is not a bad thing, especially as we pull things into the digital darkroom. And we're going to spend a week on that or two. But I kind of want to introduce a couple of concepts to you as far as that digital darkroom is concerned, where if you feel if it's a little bit underexposed or you want a little bit more highlights, that kind of thing going on, there's a couple of ways to go through and do that. So what I'm going to show you is an image that I have already uploaded in Photos, and it's an image that I took when I was on a motorcycle trip on my way out to California. And this is out by Dell, Utah. Let's not get started on that. And it's there was this squall going through. It was sunrise, and as I looked in my rearview mirrors along the freeway, I saw this amazing color going on. So I found my nearest exit and stopped, parked my bike, and grabbed this photograph. Now this is an HDR or high dynamic range photograph. That means that we have detail in these kind of highlights here, and we also have detail happening down here in the shadows. But what I wanted to show you is in the editing software here, and all these things that we have to choose from, we have shadows here and highlights here, and I can go through and in my shadows I can go through and increase that and pull out more detail in shadows. But you see that kind of flattens things out here. I like a lot of contrast in my kind of shooting, but if you want to pull more detail out of your shadows, you can certainly use that shadow slider. If you want less detail, you can see that's going down more into the inky blacks in here, a little too inky for me. This has already kind of been post-produced that way, so I'm not going to go through and add anything to that. And as the same goes for highlights, not a whole lot going on here, but if I bring my highlights down all the way, you can see over here on the left-hand side, this burn over here on the left-hand side, there's no information there. There's no information captured as far as data is concerned, because it just burned out. It went 100% burn on this. So there's nothing really that can be done to go through and recover that. And it's only about 5% of my image, so I'm not all that concerned about that. What I really like about Photos, as far as Mac's software is concerned, is it gives me a slider where I can go through and change many settings relative to each other this way. That will give me a kind of that HDR, that high dynamic range that I might be looking for. And so that might be something that might help you out, especially while you're shooting your tight photographs, as you go through and maybe try to pull out some more detail out of your shadows. Remember, always expose, well, try to expose for your highlights, so your highlights don't burn later on if you're trying to go into post-production to do something about that. And again, in photojournalism, there's not a whole lot of editing going on, so we want to make sure that the highlighted area, the brightest area of a photograph, which might be your subject's face, it might be fire, it might be something along those lines, that has a proper exposure. Because if it goes overexposed, there's no data left there for us to go through and manipulate that and save that later on in post. Okay, so I hope this helps you out. Have a good week. If you have any questions, you know where to find me. All right, thanks.